Hello and welcome to PMI's Leading for Business Excellence podcast. I'm Susanna Clark, Managing Partner of PMI, the Performance Improvement Consulting and Training firm. This podcast brings inspiring stories from across the globe and a multitude of different sectors, with great leaders who share their experience and what business excellence means to them. In this episode, I'm joined by Sally Mackey, Professor of Applied Theatre and Performance at the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama. Sally talks about people's sense of place, how to create a sense of belonging and attachment, and how these translate from her work with communities to the workplace. Listen out for her thoughts on how to get buy-in to change, and also her thoughts on what make a great leader. I do hope you enjoy this episode. Hi Sally, thank you so much for joining me today on our podcast Leading for Business Excellence. It's great to have you with us.
It's great to be here.
I wondered if we could just start off with a brief introduction. If you just tell people a little bit about yourself and a bit about your career to date.
Okay. Yes, I'm a Professor of Applied Theatre and Performance at somewhere called the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama, which is one of the small specialist colleges of the University of London. Applied theatre, which might be a term that people aren't fully aware of, references drama that takes place in community contexts. You're applying all different forms of drama, theatre performance, but outside traditional venues, really, in different countries, in different contexts around this country. So that's applied theatre, and I'm professor of it at Central. Central is about 1,100 students strong, so it's all undergraduates, postgraduates, MA level, and PhD candidates as well. So it's quite a large institution for just doing drama, but yeah.
And particularly the community side of drama, was that something that you've always been interested in? Were you specifically pulled towards this when you were younger?
When I was younger, so when I was something like 7, clearly I wanted to be an actress because so many people did, didn't they? So I eventually read English and drama at university, which was relatively new then. I didn't go to drama school to learn to act. My school was keener on people going to university than drama schools, and when I got to university, I realised I wasn't even as good as most of the people in my group at actually performing. And then I began to develop an interest in other uses of drama. So I didn't know that it was taught in schools. I found that out and became quite passionate about that. So I did a PGCE originally and taught in comprehensive schools for 13 years, which was a tremendous period of life and hugely rewarding, if hugely exhausting. After doing my master's, I realized that I wanted to move on and literally move up. So I moved to Central to work originally on what was a 4-year secondary BEd. So that was a teacher training degree. Then we expanded that and it became this applied theatre degree. So I've been working in this field for probably around 30 years now. And as with so many things, you develop a love, you develop what it is you're particularly interested in, and that's how that happens. So from wanting to be an actress in the school playground, making up plays with my friend when I was 7, I moved to developing an interest in drama in the community. Yes.
And so I'm interested, in this podcast, it's all about leadership, obviously. I'm interested in you as a leader, and particularly in that academic world, which obviously an awful lot of our clients and people we work with aren't necessarily academic. We do work with a couple of universities, but I wonder if you could just tell me a bit more about that leadership role, particularly for you as a leader, particularly at Central, I would guess.
Yes. it- there was kind of two phases of leadership for me at Central. So first of all, it was leading a team of academic staff in developing drama education, applied theatre at Central. Uh, so that was about growing a particular form of the discipline, of getting out there, of attracting students to come and take the courses, of working with academic colleagues in other institutions and abroad, and encouraging my team who worked on the degree to it sounds a bit naff, but to fulfill their potentials. So it was about ensuring that staff had the opportunity to teach the areas they wanted to teach and to research the areas they wanted to research. And gradually we built up the student numbers, which meant you could build up staff. So we've become a bit of a powerhouse for this field at Central. There are 10, 11 members of staff working in this area, and it's known internationally for that. But that was very much about making sure. I guess I would also say one of the key things of leadership for me was appointing the right staff. Um,
Yes.
really ensuring that you've got the people who could work collegially, who were innovative, who had great ideas, and of course could also teach students. So, and it wasn't just about appointing great staff; it was also about recruiting great students right through undergraduate, postgraduate, and so on. Because they're your best advocates. And if
Mm.
they go out of the institution saying, this was a tremendous place to do your degree, then inevitably your field builds, your institution builds its reputation, your staff feel more engaged. So that was one area of leadership at Central. And then I moved to become a pro dean, deputy dean, and then pro dean, which moved me into the middle to senior management layer and took me out of leading that degree that I had led, the applied theatre degree. That was about working with staff across the institution. There were two pro deans and there was a dean, and we had a major restructure. So this was about bringing people into your vision, and perhaps persuading them that ideas, this idea might be effective, this idea might not. It was about getting people on side to create new courses, to create new levels of courses, and obviously working closely with my immediate colleagues in the faculty and dean's office to um, listen to them, but also to offer thoughts and ideas. So we'd weekly meetings and so on and so forth. So that was very much about leading in teaching and learning at the institution, and also in admissions and recruitment. So my portfolio was quite wide, but I would sum it up by saying gently leading other staff into new ideas and ensuring that the current work that they undertook was fit for purpose and exciting.
Yeah, because that's not easy, is it? I mean, I think any organization who is looking to evolve and to create new, bring in innovation, create new, whether it's products, services, in your case, curriculum, um,
Yeah.
getting people on side. I mean, that, tests your influencing skills, doesn't it? Because sometimes that's taking people out of their comfort zones a lot, isn't it?
Yes, it was. So, for example, we had a number of masters MA courses at Central, all led by individual people, and we needed to bring those masters together into a sort of masters framework, to ensure parity. They were a little bit not not quite the same in terms of quality systems, so we had to bring them together into a master's framework. And that was tough because it meant that individual members of staff who had developed their own degree were being asked to reshape it, to give different credit levels, to give different percentages to different units. So that was a pretty wholesale change, which took place over 2 to 3 years. Then we introduced MFAs. I don't know if that's familiar to you, but MFA,
Not heard of that
Master of
term
Fine
before.
Art. No,
Okay.
it's more well known in the States, MFAs, and in the States it's quite often a 3-year course. In this country it tends to be a 2-year course, so rather than the 1-year masters, you're doing a 2-year MFA. It's a particularly handy qualification for students from the States, and is becoming increasingly important over here and in Europe. So we introduced an MFA level for 7 or 8 of our master's programs, and again that was a whole new change. So I was
Mm.
holding wrote the overall generic curriculum, if you like, and then people would slot in. But encouraging people to do that and to persuade them that this was a good thing and this would benefit them and their potential students and their subject field was quite major. Yeah, it's a really useful qualification, and it means you get 2 years of studying at that level rather than just one.
And so I'm quite, we talk a lot about change, and obviously we're working with a lot of clients to create change. And one of the challenges they have is just that bringing
Mm,
everybody with them, and how
mm.
you do that successfully. I wonder if you've got any tips from the work that you did with that change that you could
Mm.
share.
It, there was I think a vibrancy that with the new team at the top, if you like, the restructure
Hmm.
that had taken place. Um, so perhaps we were a little bit gung ho in enthusiasm. Um, but an ex-student once said this of me. He said, "What you used to do was to get people to say what you wanted to do, so to get them to think that they'd thought of it, that it was
Right.
their idea." And I can remember very distinctly sort of coming up with this idea and then getting people to contribute to it on a huge whiteboard. And we had a away day, and it was about leading them to believe that
Mm.
they were contributing and building into the overall idea. That's a moment, that's a day I remember very clearly as a moment of change, and then we could move on from that. So once we got people to buy into the overall idea of it, it was then my role to talk to people individually, to have one-to-ones with them, to discuss how they could match in, and so on and so forth. So I would say it was it was almost a slightly innocent enthusiasm from our little leadership team, that then and allowing people and encouraging people to build into the overall ideas, and then moving on out to talk to people individually and work with people individually or in small groups. So I don't know if
Mm.
that kind of answers your question, or
No, yeah, definitely, 100%. Yes, because what you're describing is helping people to, as you say, to make it their change, because
yes,
they've got some buy-in to it, because they
yes.
were party to the consultation.
Yes, that's
Makes a
right.
huge difference.
And and
Yeah,
and
yeah,
quite an informal it wasn't, how when major changes take place, sometimes there's a formal consultation process. This wasn't about that. This was a sort of, let's get together and create something new and that's going to be
mm,
worthwhile and that's really going to help, and students are going to love it, and so on and so forth. So yeah, getting them to buy into that, I think. Yeah.
yes. Doing it with them, not to them. We often
Yeah,
talk about it
completely.
in that term.
Yeah.
Yes.
Although at times, clearly, there were moments where one had to say, no, that actually won't work in terms of what we're trying to do because of this, and this. So
Yeah.
there were moments where, of course, you had to say terribly nicely, this, and this.
Yes. Yes. And you talked at the beginning about your role and the work that you're doing with applied theatre, and that being part of the community. I know that we've talked about the work that you've done with Place, and I wondered if you could
Mm,
tell us a bit more about that. What is
mm,
it? And then what impact that can have?
mm. So my work on performing place began, as so much, I think, so many academics work does begin with working with students. So we would take a group of students to the Minnock Theatre each year down in Cornwall and put on a production there. And I noticed fairly soon that that memory was very important to the students. It became a sort of iconic moment. So I did some research into this and the students' responses, and I started to develop this idea of creating special places that hold fast in the memory, potentially because we move around so much more now. Our mobility, whether it's deterritorialization, whether it's decisions, a sort of cosmopolitan movement, or whether it's a forced movement, are we in need of finding special places to replace the longevity of our embedded place? So people who might live in long-term communities no longer have that security. So are we actually seeking other forms of place to
Hmm.
to to replace to replace that? So it
Yeah.
started with that. And then there was a series of experiments that I did with a group on the borderlands of England and Wales in a field studies centre, which was, if we're saying that place is important, how might we actually perform or undertake performance activities that can enhance or create a sense of place, which we did for three August bank holidays running. How could we find or re-find a sense of place through performance activities, through doing strange performances and so on?
Mm.
Could we increase place attachment? And I mean, there's a lot of research about if you are attached to place, your well-being will be improved, and
Okay.
that's come out in a number of studies that I've read. So this began to move on for me to take it out into communities. So a lot of experimentation, a lot of thinking about how important place is. Right, what can we do with that? How do we create place for others? And that's when I started to get some research funding and some research grants and work with a number of practitioners in different environments where there were perhaps problems with place. So, for example, we worked with migrants, asylum seekers, refugees up in Oldham, relatively new to the area, some of whom had very little English. And we worked with them in and around Oldham on a curious, I mean, it started very basic, cup of tea and cakes, it started with that. And then we moved on to little exercises in the drama studio. And then we started to just find ways of those migrants, that group, feeling as though they were part of that place, which might be putting a little lighting gel design in a window which they'd created. So they became a part of that place, and subverting place as well. So I remember we had a sort of strange kind of tea party outside the library in quite a cold alleyway, a rather daunting disenfranchising area of Oldham, and we changed that so that we had a tea party there, so they became
Mm.
more at ease with that place. There are a number of other experiments, and this all built up with thinking further about place theory and what we could do with it. How could we change the nature of a place for people so that it became more accessible, more welcoming, more friendly, um, more interesting as well? We did a project with St Mungo's, which is a hostel for 24/7 supported care for adults with mental health issues. And
Hmm.
we did a project with St Mungo's in Camden, and that was actually about taking them out of the hostel and along the local roads, which were quite intimidating. To come out of that hostel was quite intimidating for some of the group. So the practitioners I worked with, we did a number of exercises. We sprinkled sprinkles on a pavement leading to the ice cream parlor sprinkles. We tied messages onto trees for passers-by, good wishes for passers-by, so that our clients, our people we were working with, began to feel not just more at ease with this place because they'd undertaken strange activities, but they felt a sense of ownership as well because they were passing on good wishes to others.
Mm.
So those are two examples. I can, I
I
can, I
re-
can go on.
no, well, I was going to say I
Sorry.
really like that link. That well, I'm really interested in the link that you talked about there, but both about so the sense of well-being, the sense of having this. If I understand you correctly, what we're saying is that having a stronger sense of place is good for your well-being,
Yep.
and a stronger sense of ownership as well, and passing on the good wishes. I really like that
Mm,
idea because that's not about so much about doing something for yourself, is it? That's more about doing
mm,
something for others. So I'm
mm.
quite curious
It's in,
about
it's
what
in,
effect that has.
yeah. Yes, it is for others, or those messages were for others, but the client group were very much those adults at St Mungo's. So
Mm,
yes, they were passing that on, those messages on for others, but it was they themselves who needed the attention. You know, these are people
mm.
who've been
Yes.
through huge trauma, homelessness. Uh, one young woman had been in hospital for 2 years, and was trying to come to terms with coming out. So you're right, and because they then had some ownership on the place, they were able to pass that on to others. They felt able to do that. And I remember another exercise we did. There's a very boring, you wouldn't notice it. It's a sort of triangle of pavement with some iron railings around it. And we decided one day that we would set it up as a kind of party site. So we took some false green turf, we took streamers, we took balloons, we took all sorts of other things. Plastic umbrellas, even though it wasn't raining, and we're twirling those round, and music. We had a music player. So that little triangle, which nobody had, very close to where the hostel was, in fact, very close to
Mm,
Central where I work, that little triangle, which nobody would notice, suddenly became this party site.
mm,
And people who passed by, of course, commented and noticed it and asked questions about it, which again gave our clients, our community from St. Mungo's, a sense of pride in
yeah.
creating something that other people were intrigued by, if that
Mm,
makes sense. And
mm.
I never go past that triangle now without remembering that as a party site, and
Yeah, yeah, of
the
course.
pleasure and the
Absolutely.
joy that people had from it. So yeah.
Yeah.
Mm,
And I think what you're talking about, I mean, it affects nearly all of us at different times, doesn't it? Even if we're not in such a bad place. So not a migrant, but for instance, if I'm starting a new job, and I'm working in a new organization, and I'm going to a new location, and I don't know it, and I don't know the people, the anxiety that I feel associated with that transition is really strong because you're so concerned about how am I going to feel in this
mm,
place?
mm,
How am I
mm.
going to do my
Yeah,
best?
yeah. No, I would agree. And places are never going to stay the same. Um, and one project that we undertook again, actually in Oldham, which Oldham Council effectively commissioned, was in one of their neighbourhoods called Clarksfield, which is one of the poorest neighbourhoods in one of the poorest towns in the UK. Um, Social economic rating is very low, and because of that, they have a number of refugees and asylum seekers who come in, and the council hosts them there because the housing is so cheap. Anyway, there's one particular area, Clarksfield, which was traditionally white working class many years ago. Mill town, Oldham was a mill town, and then the Asian population, because of course we brought people over to work in the mills as the mills were declining, and as the working class of Oldham no longer wished to have those jobs. Um, and more recently, a number of Roma community moved in, and there were tensions in that community. There were tensions between the white population, the Asian population, and the Roma community. So we created a metaphor of theatre and drama for a week where foreign beings landed and their spaceship needed positive energy to take off again, because otherwise they couldn't get home. So they spent the week going around schools, around the streets, creating, I mean, to all intents and purposes, it looked bizarre, but actually it created a sense of excitement and joy with the young people
Mm.
and the adults, and a final event where, of course, the positive energy that they'd gathered from the people in Clarksfield did fuel the spaceship, and they did, you'll be glad to know, they did take off and return to their home planet. So, where I'm getting at, working through metaphor, we have found to be a particularly useful way of encouraging people to revision their location and their place and their site, and to think about it differently because of the metaphor that we're employing. So getting people to speak positively about Clarksfield was a way of
Mm.
getting them to think positively about Clarksfield. So they would speak it to our alien figures, um, our two beings and their baby, and therefore they would think it more. They would think more positively about Clarksfield. And that, I think, is interesting, that if you are asked to speak and say positive things about somewhere, your own mindset slightly changes. So you were giving the example earlier of going to a new job, a new
Mm.
location, a new site, and feeling anxious and nervous about it. If you're given the opportunity to speak positively about yourself in that new place, and to
Mm.
speak positively about that place once you arrive there, then inevitably you're going to feel more comfortable.
Yes, yes, yes. About being. It feels as though it's about being quite quickly involved in in
Yes,
that as well. Yes, to
completely.
create that
Yes,
attachment.
completely. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes, yes. And that's something that I've said on many other occasions. Actually, it's about increasing the speed of place attachment, and that's what these kind of activities do. They actually allow you to attach yourself more quickly and more speedily to place than you otherwise might. So it
Mm.
allows you to review the place, but also to attach more speedily. Yes.
Really, really fascinating. I mean, and obviously, some of this dramatic, spacemen wandering around the streets and spaceships arriving. I can imagine some people saying, "Well, we can't have that as within our organisation because it's a very different thing." But if you were talking to somebody who was leading an organisation and wanting to get a stronger sense of belonging more quickly, what do you think leaders can do to build that attachment, because that's part of getting the success, particularly from new staff as well, isn't it?
Mm. Yeah, I think there is a particularly interesting issue at the moment as well about leading organizations. There are a number of issues currently post pandemic, I think, which is an interesting challenge for leaders and managers. It's almost about reprocessing, managing the process of change back to the workplace in several
Mm.
instances, managing the change to allow for a hybrid form of working. Um, and I mean, there's a number of, which you will know better than I am sure, there are a number of studies in productivity in workspaces, and
Mm.
how you encourage productivity in workspaces. And I was having a look at some of this, and it's clear that there are certain things like the light, the noise, the organization, the tidiness, the site itself, and keeping it but nowhere did I see anything about changing the workspace quite often to allow people to think differently about it. So it's not the humdrum, it's not the ordinary every day that you walk in. It's about thinking through, perceiving it differently. I did
Yeah,
actually see a company working with a business. I can't remember the details because it was quite some years ago now, where they the leadership team were wanted to bring the workers in the office, um, more closely together, but also to encourage them to perceive their workspace more positively. And this company did actually come in and get the people who were working there to change the space. They would, so you would open a cupboard and there wouldn't be stationery that there used to be. There probably isn't any stationery nowadays, is there? Because it's all digital. But those, and the toilets, there was unusual odd things which made the space more interesting for
mm.
people working there. And again, they felt ownership because they were involved with those changes, they were involved with those transformations. Now, I don't think I've quite answered your question there. So mm,
Oh
I
no,
think
I think you have.
there's also something about what has happened with home and the
Yes,
working from home, which I think is
yes,
something that obviously leaders are not concerned about, but concerned with. There are things
mm.
to think about. So I'm writing about homes and homescapes at the moment, and I think the pandemic has led to two specific things that I'm interested in. One is that the home space has become, and many people have said this, blurred. It's work, it's the home kind of work, the dishwasher emptying, the cleaning, and it's leisure. But those boundaries are all blurred now. And the office, the replies from people on emails saying, um, please send this. I won't look at this unless it's in work hours, or which seems
Mm.
to me to be a symbol of how people have been so pressed at home to use their home time to work. And that blurring,
Mm.
I think, is particularly challenging now. I also think that homes have become almost overdwelt for some people. There's a lot of writing about the security and the sanctuary of home, and uh, how that offers, not all obviously, I mean, home has also been a site of oppression, particularly for women over the years, where it has become in some instances a kind of form of prison. But this idea that we are over familiar with our homes. So how do leaders of business organizations, how do they handle that when people might not want to any longer take the long commute into work, but there is that problem also of Zoom fatigue and being at home the whole time.
Mm.
That's a bit muddled, Suze, but it's about how to deal with all this, the challenges that have arisen since the pandemic. How do you
I,
embed people back into an office space such that it's a pleasurable place to be? How do you engender a community? How do you ensure that people are talking and bantering and laughing and joking together live, not pull people away from their home workspace to to the detriment of people's headspace, but how do you also enliven the home space where people are working? It's very, very complicated, and I'm not sure I've got any answers except to subvert, to alter, to change, to shift, to make people see things differently.
yes, I mean, I agree with you. It's incredibly difficult. I was talking to a younger friend of mine who's around 27. That's it. He started his job in the pandemic. And so it was completely working from home. He didn't meet anybody except over Zoom. And
Mm.
once things changed, he started to visit the workplace occasionally. and found it a very not hostile in the people sense of the word, but it wasn't welcoming, and also
mm,
there wasn't much of a community there. So he would go in, and there would only perhaps be 2 or 3 people in instead of an office of well over 100, and that
mm.
didn't therefore make him feel a sense of belonging to the organization, or even a sense of wanting to belong to the
Yeah.
organization, and then sort of retreated back to home because home was a much more safe place,
Yep.
and a safer environment to be in, and a more comfortable environment. So it's very difficult balancing all of
Mm,
that and trying to recreate that office working environment in a
mm.
positive way.
I'd be very interested in the statistics of how many people started a new job at the beginning of the pandemic, and therefore the majority of the work was online, and have now moved on because
Mm,
because of all the things that you've just said, that constant sense of being online and then going into a workspace that isn't fully inhabited, uh, and feeling a lack of welcome, um, and therefore the job itself isn't right for them. And
mm,
I've noticed that
mm.
at our place, people have moved on who joined us at the beginning of the pandemic, and I'm certain it's partly because they haven't had that welcoming environment that you would have got with most jobs, and they believe now if they move somewhere else where gradually people are returning to work, they will get more of that sense of belonging. So yeah, I think it's an interesting problem. I mean, it's fascinating too, isn't it? Because a number of organisations, a number of companies have seen this as a way of downsizing their office space, that
Yeah,
people will only
yeah.
be in 2 days a week, something like that,
Mm,
so they don't need as much office space. But the culture of the zing that comes from working with other people in a space, it's very difficult to reproduce online. And if the
yes.
workspace isn't welcoming or shifting or changing or vibrant in some way, then yeah,
Mm,
you're
mm,
not going to get that. So
yeah,
I'm really interested in seeing things differently. And that I think can be undertaken in any work environment. You don't need whole huge performance companies coming in to change the space. Um, but I don't think enough attention has been paid to it post pandemic, particularly.
and I really was interested in your reflections on that idea of creating a changing workspace that
Mm,
therefore has an intrigue about it, that and then
yes.
again that word spreads. Yeah, I went into the office the other day and
Yeah.
actually it was all a bit different, and that
Yes.
is
Yeah.
enticing, isn't it?
It is. It really is. It's attractive, and it makes you think differently about places. I mentioned the
Yeah,
triangle outside Central where I work, and rather than ignoring that space or not really seeing it, I always remember that. And I've been fortunate enough to do a number of projects at work with students, and I still see various bits of what they did in curious places. If I happen to go substage, for example, I remember the piece of work that they created so underneath the main stage, the piece of weird work that they created and what was going on there. And I remember that rather than the awful dusty bits of metal and concrete and so on that are the usual owners of that space. So
yeah,
it's not just changing it on a daily basis, it's about changing it such that you remember it differently for a long time into the future.
yes, yeah,
And it makes a space very attractive. And because you're performing it, and I use that term very, very loosely, because you're performing it in different ways, the place itself becomes a different space. So you're actually moving around it differently,
yeah,
you because of what's going on and what changes are. Those habitual routines are slightly changed, which again is an intriguing way of then that place, the iteration of that place, really, the manifestation of that place is slightly changed because of the way that you're moving around it, because of this curious thing that's been going on.
Mm. I think it's a fascinating subject, the whole subject of place, and I think creating that
Mm.
attachment to it is incredibly interesting, and something that I'm not sure how much we knowingly pay attention to it in that commercial world. So this is really interesting
No.
and lots to learn, I feel. Um, from
And
your own
also, sorry.
perspective, no, you go.
Mhm.
Do you also?
Well, I was just going to say that for some of your organisations that work with others, so I've worked with local councils. I mentioned Oldham. I've also worked with Bexley, where Bexley Broadway was a site of tension, generational tension and racial tension, particularly when schools poured out into the Broadway at sort of 3-4 o'clock. And the council very much wanted to address this. So we undertook a mammoth project, which took workshops into schools, which had live events in Bexley Broadway. Again, it was through metaphor. So you would see youngsters. There are a number of activities set up on the Broadway, and you'd see youngsters gifting to older people. So they'd make something and then they'd hand it over as a gift to an older person walking by. And then the older person would comment afterwards in a reflection, if the evaluation team managed to catch them, to say, I hadn't expected that and I've never experienced anything like that before.
Yeah.
So some of your organizations possibly work with other organizations who who might find a use for this kind of work to
Mm,
change the atmosphere of a particular area or group.
mm. Yeah. Fascinating. And through the work that you've done, over the years, who would you say, or what even, has had the most influence on you as a leader?
Gosh, who or what is that the
Yeah.
question? Who or what has had an influence? Yeah, I think it's sort of easier to start with the who, isn't it? Really, uh, I was fortunate enough to work in some pretty remarkable schools in my earlier years. And I would say each of the head teachers were leaders I respected. I don't know whether that's the youth in one that you automatically perhaps look up to people. I don't know, but they were, and they had something in common, which was a commitment and a passion to the work
Hmm.
that they were doing, and a caring for their staff and a caring for what their staff were trying to achieve, and a support for that. Whether that was, I mean, schools are socials for money, but whether that was finding a couple of £100 for a couple of new lights or something in the drama department, or whether it was just touching base every now and then and how's it going? You've only been here a year or two. How's da, da, da. And I was really lucky. I worked under three extraordinary head teachers who imbued a sense of whatever you did was important and welcomed. And all of them, I think it was about, and the word I haven't used, humanity. They had a humanity about them. So I was pretty heavily influenced by those people. Um, Clearly, I've been influenced by academics in my field, but I don't think that's not necessarily where you're after. There have been some great thinkers on performance, on space, on
Mm,
place, um, who have really inspired me. Um, the leadership at my own institution in Central, I was fortunate enough to work under a dean of studies for a while there, who could laugh and could joke, who could talk about food, which was a particular interest of his and mine, so we could share things in common. Um, he encouraged us to develop our own ideas, And yet if it was too out of reach, he would say, you might want to think about this slightly differently. uh, but again, I knew that he cared and he had our backs at all
Yes.
times. And if we were out of order, if we had gone too far, or if we had said something inappropriate or dealt with a member of staff perhaps not as well as we could, he would have said that to us.
Mm.
So similarly, it's those kind of people who've I've found the easiest to work with and the best to work with, and who have inspired me. In terms of what, it's difficult. All the projects that I've been involved with, I've learnt from and
Mm.
has expanded my own horizons and my own knowledge. It's a challenging
Mm.
world out there, and I'm a white middle class woman, in fairly select environment, higher education, university, and it's easy to lose touch. But the project work has allowed me to become very aware of the complexity of human existence and society in so many parts of this country, and of course elsewhere. Um, so each of those projects has kept me on my toes, whether it be the languages to use appropriately, whether it's to really understand the problems that people are going through. And some people really are going, you actually think, I don't know how you live from day to day.
Yes.
So that's been inspiring and yet salutary, really sort
Mm.
of making you think hard about who I am and what I can or can't do to support people. Um, does that answer your question?
Yes, definitely. And I think that we all want to work ideally in a place where those around us, but in particular the leaders, that we feel they care about us as individuals. That's
Yeah.
a shift change in, it creates a shift change in our own sense of belonging and then a sense of purpose as well.
Yes.
I think
Yes.
that
Yeah.
I'm not sure everyone feels that way, because sometimes it can feel just too big, can't it?
Mm,
So
mm.
it's a challenge for
It.
leaders to create that environment in which they can
Yeah.
be seen as genuinely caring and supportive, to have people's backs like you described. That's what
Yeah.
people want.
I think that is what people want. I don't think all people are capable of that. Having said
Mm.
that, I have worked for people and seen people whose personal ambition overrides all that, uh, which is difficult. Um,
Mm.
it's a hard one because inevitably, if you're a leader, you have certain responsibilities that you will have and the people who work for you won't have, and you're balancing agendas all over the place.
Yes.
I'm fortunate. I work in a caring industry. I mean, higher education is a caring industry. So, on the whole, I work with people of a like mind who are ethical, and ethics is big. I want to work for people who are ethical and behave ethically.
Mm.
Um, I want to work. I mean, if we move that on to kind of what I would perceive to be critical in a leader, that is
Yeah.
one of the areas, ethics and behaving
Mm.
ethically and honorably. If something has to be done because of this, this, and this, then I would expect to be told and explained why, rather than cover ups and shiftiness. That's not a terribly
Yes.
academic
Yes.
word, but I'm sure you know what I mean. Um, I I think l- the quality I most admire is wisdom in
Mm.
leaders. I think as a culture, we're not very good at appreciating wisdom. We tend to assume that the new and the young is good, and the new ideas are good. And actually, many of the new ideas are quite often just rewriting of the old ideas. It's the going round in
Yes.
circles kind of thing. And we're not good at appreciating age and experience and wisdom. And I think that's a
Mm.
great shame because a good leader has wisdom to offer, and confidence. I know that's a slightly strange one, but the people I'm talking about were all confident, not arrogant, but confident in their role. And I hope I am as well. I hope that I've always given that impression that I'm confident enough to say I'm wrong, for example, or I'm
Yeah.
confident enough to say I don't know. I remember a colleague of mine when I got my doctorate, my PhD, he said, now you're okay to say I don't know because you've got the qualification, and it's fine to say I don't know the answer to that because you don't feel
Yeah.
worried about that. And that sort of that confidence, not put on, not false confidence, but real, genuine, felt through confidence that communicates through to the people you work with, and it enables trust, because
Mm.
you have to have trust from the people who work for you, and that's up to you, not up to them. So, you know,
Yes, I completely
yes.
agree.
One of the things I don't like about leaders, and I've seen it time and time again, are people who uh, use their new position, so they've come in as a leader, and what they start to do is to blame the past, the previous
Right.
regime, the previous people, the previous incumbents in that role. They sort of comments about this. Oh, well, we need to change that. Da, 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 da. I don't think that's helpful at all. We all are building on what's happened before.
Yeah.
And to try and position yourself by um, dissing the past, if you like, I think is a sort of weak form of leadership.
Yes, I mean the past is there for us to learn from, but not necessarily to blame. you know.
Precisely. No, we should be learning from it. I agree with you, and building on it, but not to blame.
No,
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. Yeah.
absolutely. Sally, I think on that note, I'm going to say thank you very much for your thoughts. I think that it's been fascinating trying to get a stronger sense of particularly place and particularly understanding what that means to people, and particularly now, you're absolutely right in what you said. In this hybrid world, we are our sense of place, particularly from the workplace, has changed hugely. So how we reinvigorate and revitalize that attachment, I think, is a big question for people to start to be thinking more strongly about. And I really love
Yes.
what you said about leaders. I agree more. The ultimate leading to trust, so that people are willing to follow that person and can respect them and have confidence, even if they don't know the right answer immediately. But that trust will completely change how you are able to lead, I think.
Yes. Yes. And we forget praise, don't we? Um,
Mm.
Leaders praise, but praise well and not fatuously, not because they think they should praise. And that's a difficult one to get
Yeah.
right.
So I'm going to say thank you very much. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time today, Sally. It's been great to have a chance to talk about this with you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for asking me.
I really hope you enjoyed this episode of PMI's podcast, Leading for Business Excellence, with Professor Sally Mackey. I hope you feel inspired by what your sense of place can look like and what your sense of the workplace can be, and how we can make it better for everyone. If, of course, you'd like to know any more about how you can develop your career in business excellence and transform your organisation, please do drop us a line, team@pmi.co.uk, and do follow us on LinkedIn and subscribe to hear more. We'd really love to hear from you.